committee meetings are packed. I'm going to talk about that a little bit more in a minute. And so it's been a little bit hard to make sure we got everybody's comments. And then we're preparing for the public meetings and public input from the steering committee, planning commission, and you all once we get the draft code, because we need to have the draft code out to everybody for quite a while. It's going to be a large document. It's kind of complex. People are going to have questions, but we're not pushing this fast. There's no need to move it fast. We've been dealing with our current code for enough time, and once we adopt it, I'm sure we'll give folks a period of time after that to plan to adjust to the new code. So what have we done with the Board of Commissioners? So we started out and we asked you all to appoint a resident and a business representative to the steering committee. This is, as Doug said, our third update with you all. We will have additional special sessions, and we will work through those with the county administrator's office to schedule those with you all as we move into the future. You all will receive a draft of the code for comment in the fall of this year, and then you all will be responsible for the final adoption and final revisions once that comes to you. And obviously, if you're citizens or steering committee members or you have questions about this at any time, shoot me an email or call me, and I'll get back and we'll figure out how to get that issue. The consultant keeps what we call the issues list of things that people have said, hey, we got to deal with this. And at the end, we're going to make sure we check off all those issues and how we actually dealt with those. So for the steering committee, we've had 9 meetings so far. The dates of those are listed here. And then, as I said, in 2 weeks, we're going to have individual meetings. We will have more steering committees meetings to come, but originally we'd only planned on 6. We thought we could get through enough of this information in 6 meetings and the steering committee would be fine. The steering committee said, whoa, this is way too much. We need more time. Let's meet monthly and get this done and get it done right. So their meetings are 2 hours. We meet over the lunch. We provide them lunch, and we have a very full agenda for them. And those full agendas are what necessitated the individual meetings that are coming up, because we give them a lot of information. And sometimes we're at the end of the meeting and we want to discuss more, but people have to leave because that's all they have blocked out on their calendar. They know they're always able to contact staff or the consultant. We've had comments outside of those meetings from several steering committee members, and quite frankly, one of them said, I think you should write this section of the code this way, and did an edit on the existing code for that section and gave it to us. And so we're working with that and the rest of the steering committee members to make those changes. So there have been folks who have been very active both in and outside of those meetings. So this was the agenda of the last meeting. You would think, oh, that's simple. There's 5 things. Well, not really. It takes a long time to go through that. But you'll notice that we always started with a recap of the last meeting, because we take notes of those meetings and we say, this is what we heard. We want to make sure with them that we heard what they said the meeting before, so we get that feedback on, are we doing this correctly as we move forward? And then we go into new opportunities and new parts of the code, and then we usually end up with stuff, what we call in the parking lot. People ask questions about stuff along the way, and we try and go back to those at the end. So for the public, we had a large community meeting in June of last year. We held that meeting one at the Salvation Army out on State Avenue and one at Memorial Hall. Then we had come and go community meetings in April, where we talked about the direction the code was going with some different areas, and several of the commissioners attended those. One was in Rosedale at the Mennonite Church, and the other one was in the Northeast at one of the community centers. I anticipate that when we have the draft of the code out, we will have come and go community meetings. We haven't been out west yet, so we'll do that, and we'll have those in multiple areas in the city. And then they can always communicate with staff. And as we've been out, we've always had our email there and a way for them to communicate with us outside of those meetings through either surveys or direct contact or through other electronic communications. Then they will also have the formal opportunity to give testimony at both the Planning Commission and the Board of Commissioners meetings prior to the zoning code being adoption. So now I'm going to go through some of the things that we did at the last steering committee meeting, just so you get a taste of this. And the first thing we did is we recapped nonconformities. So I'm just going to go through that presentation as close as I can to the way the consultant did it, so you kind of get a flavor for that. So here are the different types of nonconformities. You can have a nonconforming use where you might have a commercial use in a residential district. So this might be a house on a corner that got converted to some kind of commercial use over time, but it doesn't fit with the current zoning, or maybe it was that always, and at some point the zoning got changed and we didn't catch that particular use. You could have a nonconforming structure where it's out of the setback for zoning. You could have a lot that didn't conform by, you have a narrow lot. We worked a lot on our nonconforming narrow lots with the narrow lot design guidelines so that we allowed all those 25-foot lots to be built on, where before that, they would have required 7 or 8 variances to make any one of them developable. And then you just have sites or situation. Maybe the landscaping's missing, maybe there's a sidewalk or some other, drainage issue or something that makes a site non-conforming. But that means that it's not legal to expand that. So if you have a non-conforming use here and you want to add a room to that, you can't do that under the current code. If your structure is outside of the zoning setback here, you can't get a variance for that because you've created your own hardship. So these are things that are real problems for folks in the community when it comes to expansion or alteration. What if you have a fire? Then the insurance companies get a little bit involved with that. Sometimes I've had people say, I can't get insurance because it's a non-conforming use. I spent an hour on the phone today with somebody trying to buy a building that has some non-conformities that they want to make sure that they don't buy a building with non-conforming uses because they can't finance it with their bank. So this is a very important topic as we move forward, but we don't, unless you're the zoning director on the zoning, you don't think about it unless you have a constituent call you about it. But it's an important issue and it's kind of complex. So there's obviously, like most things, there's different ways to address this. You could be aggressive, you could be flexible, you can make things conditionally approvable as we move forward. So maybe you're not completely stuck in that situation and maybe there's a way out. So in the previous meeting, we went through and we explained what did aggressive mean, what did conditional mean, what was flexible, and you'll see that we used the cell phone voting in the meetings so that they can vote for what they want. You'll see the voting here. It was 7 to, nobody wanted to be real aggressive, and that's like, don't let them do anything with them. They're there, they're permanent, nothing happens. Most people wanted a little bit of flexibility, and a couple people wanted it to be flexible. But I will note that this is reflective of our attendance. There are 24 people that have been appointed to this, and we had 9 there that day. So that I would encourage you to ask your folks to attend. We like them. We'd love for them to be there.
Rob,
Yes.
if you are repeatedly seeing our appointees not attending, can you tell us?
I can do that.
We can ask them why and remind them that
Okay.
this is important.
The other thing is that if they're not, then is there still the possibility of putting somebody in their place at this late in the game? I'm just,
We can do that. They're going to be really behind, but, they're not going to be any more behind than you all or the Planning Commission when you get this big document. So,
good point, but I just wanted to know that.
right.
Thank you.
So that we made sure that everybody agreed that this is where we were. We wanted a flexible, possibly a couple of conditions in the use, but we didn't want to be like the current code is, and you can't do anything at all with these because sometimes that just leads to deterioration. And so we spent some time in the meeting reviewing what we'd done at the last meeting to make sure everybody understood and we understood what they had said and they knew the implications of their decision. And the code will be written following those guidelines. So then we reviewed the different types of zoning districts. So you have a base district, which is like you all would be familiar with R1 or C2, and then you have overlay districts. And our current overlay districts are the floodplain overlay district, the commercial overlay zone that governs how commercial development happens, and the 47th Street overlay district that we did in conjunction with Roland Park and Westwood. So we talked about those, and we talked about a new one, which might be a neighborhood conservation overlay district. We went back through the zoning districts, and we matched them, the zoning district, to what would the land use plan designation be for this. So we also have a chart that we've been through with them. How would this equate to the current zoning district? But in this case, we said the countryside district would be a rural residential district. So you see that there's 3 different types of zoning districts that you might have in a rural residential district. There are 2 that you might have in a low-density residential district. And then general neighborhood would be medium and urban, and then urban would be the high density, like your R6, R5, R6 types of development. Then we have commercial and mixed use, and we call it commercial and mixed use because this code is a blending of a traditional zoning code and what we have now is a traditional neighborhood design ordinance that allows for like the 39th and Rainbow development. And so this code is going to blend those codes so you can do both things within the same code, and there's more opportunities and more options for that. And so that's why we called it commercial and mixed use. And then under business and light business and industrial, we have 3 districts that generally follow what we have now, because those industrial zoning is kind of industrial zoning, and you know it's working all right. We don't have as many conflicts there as we do in other places, and so when we can leave things a little bit the same, we're also doing that if it's working. We went back and talked about what we heard in the steering committee, and I'm going to highlight a couple of these. The first was we needed light, medium, and heavy industrial zoning districts in the new code, because we thought about putting them all into one with some different caveats in there, but the committee thought we needed 3, so that's why you saw in the previous chart there were 3 industrial zoning districts. Then we talked about we needed a new type of neighborhood district, like a conservation or a heritage neighborhood district, but this is where we talked about becoming an overlay, having a neighborhood conservation overlay district. And so we heard that and we talked about that with them. And then an online tool, this was very important to them, an online tool for steering committee review of the draft zoning code. And so we are working on something that will allow a limited community comment. By community, I mean steering committee, staff, and possibly planning commission, board of commissioners, so that you could write comments in the, like you would in Word, and then the consultant could see all that, and we could have understand where some of those issues might be before, and resolve them before we get into an open session. I don't know, I've got to check with legal to make sure that's not an open meeting, and so you guys might not be in that group for open meeting rules, but we'll work on that, see how we can do that. But that was very important to them, and we are working on that, but we don't have that. Number one, we don't have a full draft code yet, but we also don't have the mechanism worked out, but we've got a couple of options.
Rob, can you clarify? So on that second column, third, all neighborhoods don't want, does that mean no neighborhood wants, or not all neighborhoods don't?
Oh, sorry. So what I would say to this is that, in the urban area, you have neighborhoods that end on a arterial street with a corner store, and, like around 7th Street or Minnesota Avenue or something like that. And we even have some corner stores that are more interior to the neighborhoods. But in Piper, you kind of have a subdivision that's a subdivision, and some of those folks that live in those areas express, well, you know what? We picked where we want to live because we like this. We may not want a corner store everywhere.
Why doesn't it say not every neighborhood wants?
It's just it was not typed well. These were notes that the consultant put together for the, and it just wasn't typed well. So sorry about that. You all caught more than the steering committee did on that one. But basically, it means not everybody wants to be the same. Not everybody wants to have, the dense urban look of the traditional neighborhood design at their entrance. Some people want to have a subdivision and be a subdivision. So then we moved on to the new material, and we started talking about composite zoning standards. And this is a model the consultant is proposing that other cities are using, and including Olathe. And so he talked a little bit about the Olathe ordinance as we went through this. So composite zoning talks about the site, the building, and the use. And so the land use is one part of it, and within that use, you might have different site designs and different buildings that can go on the different sites within that. So we have developed matrices to allow folks to pick within that and give them more flexibility. But even within those three areas, you have these things along the bottom here, plus others like material standards and things like that. But how big is the lot? How dense is the development? What's it going to look like? What's the building articulation? And so we go through a lot of those. The composite zoning gives you choices in how to handle all of those things. And so I'm going to go through some of those with you to give you a flavor of what the new zoning ordinance could be versus just a text version of, you can build, in this part of the code right now, it says you can, if you're in a commercial district, you can have a fast food drive-through restaurant. And then you have to go to the other part of the code that says, these are the design guidelines for that building. And then a third part of the code says, this is where you're stacking it. This is how you do parking and car stacking for a fast food restaurant. And there's probably another part of the code you have to go to or two to figure all that out. So the first thing we do is we figure out what are the allowed uses. And for example, C1 is our current use. That would equate to a neighborhood center. And one of the key things is a mixture of complementary land uses. It doesn't all have to be commercial, because we want mixed uses and mixed incomes, and we want to provide for higher density residential housing and retail and commercial centers, because those are things that, as we look at 39th and Rainbow, and, at one time that had a big housing component to it, right? One of those buildings was going to be an apartment. And so, but what we found is that per acre, that's our highest property tax generator per acre in the city. So when we see things like that, we want to encourage that kind of development. We want to make it easy to do in the code. And so that's why we show these other types. You can do your standard commercial bank. You could do a little strip center, but you can also do the mixed use corner store with residential above it or an office above it in these neighborhood centers. And so each of the districts, I'm not going to go through each one, but each one of them has that type of flexibility built in for encouraging development that we think has been positive. So for the uses, we have a big table that has all of the districts across the top, all of the uses down the side, definitions over here, and we'll also have nationally recognized land use coding that's part of this. We'll have a big table, and we'll have a table for each of the districts, but basically you can go and look in whatever district you want to look in and see what uses are allowed. And we'll also have this linked to our encode system that'll generate this automatically to a map. But if you want to either find a use and find out where you can do it, whether it's permitted with a P or a special use with an S, or if it was an accessory use, there's no A's on here, but we will have accessory uses too, like, your shed in your backyard or a swimming pool, something like that. But those will all be clarified in this one chart. And so you can go to one place and see whatever district you're in the city and what you can do there. And right now, to find that out, if you don't use the encode software, which not enough people use, even though we've tried to do a good job of advertising that, you have to go to each different zoning district and look for that in the code. And even when zoning staff does that, there are times where you can do something in industrial that's allowed in the C1 zoning district, but you have to read the M3, the M2, the M1, the C3, the C2, the C1 district to get to where you understand that. That's just not reasonable to expect the public to be able to figure that out. I mean, between the zoning staff and the land use attorneys, we get there, but we want it to be much easier than that. But this is going to be a very large chart. and it will be helpful to be good with Excel to use it. Oh. So then we talked about within the areas of the building, so what kind of building are you doing? So we've been focusing on a neighborhood center, so we look in neighborhood center. And so we're going to be on design type C, and that'll be important as we move on. But within design type C, we talk about the facade, pedestrians, materials, garages, transition to single family. But as we move on, we're going to focus on this. This says high quality materials. Whereas if you were at a regional commercial or something else, maybe there's a step down for the materials that you could go to. But when we're in the neighborhood, we're up close to it, we want it to be the highest level. So then you move on to the high quality materials and you say, okay, I've got to be in high quality materials. So this will hyperlink you to this chart that says, okay, materials. If you're in material category 1, which is high quality materials, these are the options for you to use. What kind of metal can I use? What kind of glass can I use? Can I use wood? Can I use any synthetics? And this table is not set in stone right now, but this is, for example, we haven't had the full discussion on where do all these check marks end up with the steering committee. I mean, so you can imagine how long that will take with the steering committee to move through some of those. So then on the extra, I'll go back for a second. So then on the materials, you have the different material types, but you also, it doesn't tell you how to use them together. So then you'll link to the next part of the code that says exterior building materials. So category 1 and category 2, you have to have 80% primary and 20% secondary materials. On facades that don't face a street, so on a secondary facade, it could be 50% primary and 50% secondary. And so that's a lot more clear than what we have today, and it gives you some flexibility that's kind of inherent in the code than in the past, like when they built Sam's Club, the back of Sam's Club faces a 40-foot retaining wall. There's no need for that to be fancy. Nobody's ever going to see it, right? So they could use a different kind of material there. This is kind of builds in some of those things that we've worked on through the code over the years. So how do I design my building? So within the design, there's exterior building materials, articulation, focal points. And in this one, we're going to talk about the focal points a little bit. So if you're building a focal point, you could do it this way. There's different ways you could do the focal points. I hit the right button there. And you see the different, how you might do that to make something the focal point of the building. And so one of the things that we're going to do with the code that I think is going to make it easier to do is that in the front of the code, or at the front of where you find the code on our website for the zoning, we'll have a how-to, kind of an instruction. And also you'll remember part of the contract was Tico Productions doing a how-to video, and those are the folks that do the Chiefs promo videos. So I have high hopes that they will be able to do a better job of explaining zoning than I will ever be able to do. So it'll help the public and the folks that we work with to do new development of the community to do a great job with that. But when you see this, how do I design my buildings? We're going to step through this so that it's easier to understand as part of the code. So now we move on to what about the land? How do we design the site? So we're still in this neighborhood center area, but we have open space requirements, building placement, parking, pedestrians again, vehicle circulation now, drainage, buffering. And so then you're going to have another part of the code that will link you to, okay, how do I lay out my site? And so you'll see, okay, landscaping adjacent to sidewalks. How does that work? Well, we go over here to A and we say, oh, look, there's that dark green there. That must be a landscaping area adjacent to the sidewalk because the sidewalk is G, pedestrian circulation. And anywhere where it says required C design standards, this is going to be hyperlinked. The folks we're using are a MuniCode contractor, and when we develop the code and adopt it, it will already be in Muni code. And we'll just have to have Muni code turn the switch on, and it will update that for us, because we're working with Muni folks that work directly with Muni code to get this done. So when we have this out there, we'll know it already works and all the hyperlinks work and things like that. But you'll go through each one of those parts with your site, and the code's there, and you'll be able to see what that is in chart form. Yes, Commissioner Philbrook.
Well, what was the word you were using? What kind of code? Would you say
So
municipal
so if you
code
get
or-
on, if you on our website, if you open up the municipal code,
Municipal code, okay.
the software is called Muni code. I'm sorry.
That's why I was like, what are you saying?
Sorry. Yeah, so our municipal code is in a software program called Muni code.
Thank you.
So then within the site layout, if you have an open space requirement and there's outdoor amenity space required, it will take you to the different ways to do outdoor amenity spaces. You could have a plaza courtyard, a common green space. You could preserve stands of mature natural trees. You can have a water feature of some kind. But within each one of these categories, it will tell you and give you an example of how to do that. And right now, it's just completely text. There's very little visual in the zoning code, which also makes it boring, and it makes it a little harder to comprehend so what do they mean by having an open space or an outdoor amenity? Well, you have a space that's about this big, and you can do a plaza or a courtyard, which means it doesn't have to be green. It could be bricked. It could have seating. You could preserve something that's already there, so you don't have to spend any money on it. There's lots of ways to do that. So that's what we want them to know as they go through the code. So what does this composite zoning look like? This is an example where you have several buildings that, this is kind of close to what 39 Rainbow is, and it's not exact, but it's more of a French Louisiana feel to it. But you have the mixed-use buildings. This one might be completely residential. This one has some retail in it, obviously. There might be some offices up here. But across the street, you have a traditional pad space retailer, and down here you have a Walmart, and over here you have a grocery store. And it lets you define what street type you're going to use, what kind of building you're going to use on the street, and how you're going to make all these work together. Because we recognize that if you were to make somebody use just the TND zoning that we did for 39 Rainbow, it's very hard to get folks to mix those uses. Even though we tried with the Merck and other grocery stores along the way to say, well, what if we put retail or residential on top of you? Sometimes it's just hard. And it's more efficient to separate the uses a little bit and take advantage of building types and building styles within the development that you can. And then you get the best of both worlds. You can hide your parking a little bit. You can have all the uses that you want to have, and you have a really nice, beautiful development that everybody's proud of. So some of the other issues we talked about were Landmarks Commission review, and what things can staff do so that we don't have to go to Landmarks Commission. And currently, we do minor site changes, we do signs and other minor things like that. And do we want to extend that? Like, for instance, if you're replacing your roof in the historic district with the same kind of roof, you don't have to go to Landmarks. So when I replaced my roof, I did it in kind. It looks the same as it did before. I don't have to go to Landmarks Commission to get that approved. We don't want to make people do unnecessary steps that everybody's going to agree up front are the right thing to do. So we talked about additional overlay districts and what those meant. And we kind of explained the floodplain ordinance is given to us by the state and by FEMA. And they say, here's what we would like you to adopt. If you want to make any changes to that, show them to us ahead of time so that we can approve them or deny them. And then adopt and follow that ordinance. Otherwise, we could say you're not eligible for federal disaster relief money. So some of these things we don't have a lot of choice about. But other things, how do we want to, how is the Mission Road Overlay District working, and how do we want to, continue to work with that? And then we had a list of other things Mark talked about from prior meetings. The final thing we did is we announced that we were going to do the commission appointee interviews that I've talked about already this evening. And we let folks know that the invite for that was coming out. Please respond to it. And we actually ended this meeting in about an hour and 50 minutes because you all didn't ask as many questions as they do. I mean, we had, we had so we wanted to have, go through with this with you to show you what they're doing in their meetings. So you know that we're going through every issue in the zoning code in that level of detail. So it's just taking a long time, and I'm thankful to them for wanting to do that. It takes a while, and sometimes it's, you have some committee members that are very fluent and versed in zoning and development, and some people that are a neighborhood leader and they want to know why they don't have a sidewalk in their neighborhood. And so you have this great divergence of knowledge base and folks in there, and we want to make sure that they're all on the same level playing field to give us good recommendations so that when we come forward, they're comfortable saying to you, we worked really hard on this, it's good, and we want to try it. The last thing that I've told them in each of the meetings is that much like the sign code, we adopted the sign code a couple of years ago. Early in this process, we met with all the folks that were on the sign code committee and said, did we miss anything? And we're at 5 or 6 things to amend in the sign code. And they're primarily related to schools and churches and residential districts, and their signs aren't big. We didn't allow them enough sign area. Even though we all thought it was going to be fine when we did it, in implementation, we're hearing from them saying, this is just too restrictive. We had variances to the sign code for 2 or 3 of the new KCK schools that just opened. Because, and none of those signs look bad or garish. They're all attractive and what you would expect on a middle school or a grade school. And so we'll make those amendments with this as well. And then we'll commit to coming back and meeting with the zoning code steering committee and others and, making those amendments, in a time period we decide on in the future, because that'll be very important as well. Because, this thing could be 250 or 300 pages. And we know that we're going to try really hard, but we might have stuff that we missed for some reason. So we'll come back at a set time period and, make those corrections that we need to make. Finally, if anybody in the public wants to comment, we have a public comment opportunity here, zoningrewrite.digicate.com. And if you go to that, it'll pop up with an email and you can communicate with us that way. And I just realized I did the zoning rewrite at Digicate should be, instead of @ it should be dot right there. Sorry about that. But my phone number, my email, zoningrewrite.digicate.com are the opportunities anybody has any time to communicate about the zoning code. And I saw the longing look on your faces for me to not go past 6:30. So I have left about 20 minutes for questions, and I'd be happy to go through any questions you have about what's presented tonight or other parts of the code. I'm making the consultant let me do these presentations because this is a lot even for the staff, and I've got to feel like I am comfortable with it before I ask you to be. And so, the consultant is doing a lot of the work behind the scenes, but I want to make sure that we're all comfortable. And if it doesn't happen this fall, we need to take an extra 3 months. I'm not worried about that. I just want it to be right.
40 years, so.
To some degree, yes, yeah.
Commissioner Bynum?
I just have a question. You brought up the sign code, and this is just me wondering with the schools. You commented on a couple of the new KCK schools, and I noticed at Welborn Elementary, as they were finishing and they were almost done, it was kind of artsy, it was kind of well-born, and then that went away. Was that one of the,
Yes.
okay,
And so
I kind of liked it.
it's back.
Yes, but I don't think it's back in that iteration.
It should go back just like it was.
The lettering on the building is back. I just think it's different, but anyway, I was just curious.
So the zoning action, the zoning appeal action didn't have anything to do with that part of it. It was, they took some of it down so they were under their sign size. Because if you create your own hardship and you're too big, you can't get a variance.
Okay.
So
I
we
wonder-
took a little bit of it down, just enough to get under the regulation for a
Okay.
couple of weeks, and then put it back up.
Okay,
It was,
thanks. When you brought up sign code, it just made me wonder if
but
that was one.
that was what happened there with a couple of them. They didn't, I can tell you more later.
That's okay. Thank you.
I want to maybe just follow up on the request of Rob. So Rob, maybe it would be more appropriate for you after you have your study commission meetings, just to send an email to the commissioners and just note all the members that are on it and then note which ones attended, rather than you having to, you had one attend or not, and just make it a list of, we had a meeting, that's an update to you, and here's all my list and those attended. So just make it simple in that fashion.
I will do that.
I will also note, Rob, as he made it through the presentation, he has sent out those individual invites to each of his committee members, as he extended it to you all as well, if you want to get more one-on-one type information or one-on-three with you and the consultants, I guess, to go through it. So that is available to them. If they don't feel like they're getting their input into this, they have their ability to sit down and really take it on from that perspective and give that information to Rob. It's a lot of information that they are having to deal with, so I can certainly see why that may be a better setting for them to engage in a little bit.
Thank you, Rob, for your presentation.
Thank you. I thought you'd have more questions.
It does say we're supposed to apply.
Later on. Yeah.
Oh,
That's a
that was left over from the
consultant.
consultant's presentation.
That's right, where we?
All right, I think that concludes our presentation for the evening, this meeting, and so I'd entertain a motion.
I move that the commission go into executive session until 6:55 PM to consult with our attorneys and to discuss confidential matters regarding the status and future direction of labor negotiations as permitted under the Kansas Open Meetings Act, and that staff designated by the county administrator be present to participate in the discussion, and that we reconvene in open session at 7 PM in the commission chamber located on the first floor.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Roll call, please.
Roll call. Philbrook.
Aye.
Bynum.
Aye.
Burrows. McKiernan.
Aye.
Mugia. Johnson.
Aye.
Kane. Markley. Walters.
Thank you.
See you up there. Yeah.